Are We Living in the Last Days? The Truth About End Times Bible Prophecy, an online course by Brian Godawa.
Let's take a look at who or what is the Antichrist. Now, according to the futurist view that we've just seen, these two clips basically, and what they think about the Antichrist, that he's an individual in our near future, of course. He will rise out of Europe. He will reveal himself after the rapture. He will rule a 10-nation confederacy. He will make a covenant with Israel, and he will ultimately betray Israel, betray that covenant, and he will end up in the Battle of Armageddon, the final battle before Christ returns. Now, the Antichrist as a future individual, again, one of the famous individuals who believes this is Hal Lindsey, and here's what he said: "This man, the Antichrist, is alive today, alive and waiting to come forth." And he wrote that in 1980. Which, I guess he's still got time, but maybe another 20 years and you won't be able to say that that was true. Dave Hunt, another popularizer of this Left Behind view, says somewhere at this very moment, in 1990 he said this, on planet Earth, the Antichrist is almost certainly alive, biding his time, awaiting his cue. Of course, Dave Hunt sort of does a CYA by saying almost certainly. He wouldn't say certainly, because then he could say, I said almost certainly, not certainly, when it doesn't come to pass. Now, let's take a look at the Antichrist in the Bible and see what it says about it. First of all, the word Antichrist only appears in two books written by the same author who happened to have written Revelation, and that's the epistles of John. In 2 John 1:7, John writes, "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist." Now, the first thing I want to point out is, at least in this passage, we see that the Antichrist, what is it? You tell me. Is it an individual? Many deceivers have gone out. So those who do not acknowledge Christ as coming in the flesh, they are Antichrist. And there's many of them, aren't they? So right, it's a spirit. That's a generic way of saying it. Not like there's a spirit going around, but there's a spirit of the age that infects people, and it's those who do not acknowledge Christ. They are the deceiver and the Antichrist. So that's not an individual that's going to rise up. Now in 1 John 2:22, he writes, "Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son." And of course, contextually, if you look at that passage, he's basically affirming the same thing. He's saying anyone who denies that Jesus is the Christ is Antichrist. So it's not a specific individual, at least in either of these verses, but it is a spirit of those who deny Christ. So it's, what is it? Well, literally, what does anti mean? Against. Against Christ. So anyone who's against Christ is Antichrist. Let's look at a couple more passages, the only other two that mention it. 1 John 2:18 says, "Children, it is the last hour. And just as you heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have arisen. From this we know that it is the last hour." Now, if you'll remember a couple weeks ago, we talked about this concept of the last hour was tied into the last days, which were happening in their time period. So keep in mind that when he's talking about the Antichrist, he's tying it into the last hour of those last days back in the first century. And what does he say about Antichrist here? You've heard Antichrist is coming. Is that an individual? Well, here's what he says. "Even now many Antichrists have arisen. From this we know it is the last hour." So in his day, in John's day, before 70 AD, he said this Antichrist had come in these many individuals who were, denying Christ and not acknowledging him. Now, of course, some people will say, yeah, but maybe that's just heralding the final one individual that will come. That is one interpretation. Let's take a look at the last verse that this talks about it. 1 John 4:3, "And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God." There it is again. He keeps reiterating. Anyone that does not confess Jesus, that denies Jesus is the Christ. "And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that it is coming. And now it is already in the world." So here he most clearly says the spirit of Antichrist is already in the world. And he doesn't say it's an individual. He says it's a spirit, doesn't he? You've heard the spirit of Antichrist is coming. It doesn't say you've heard the Antichrist is coming. The spirit of the Antichrist is coming. So what I would argue is basically, and of course in the context of their language, the spirit of Antichrist, the Antichrist was all basically the same way of saying the same thing. That there's going to be this attitude or spirit of the people that is going to be attacking and against Christianity and against Christ. And it's already in the world. And those are the only passages that speak about Antichrist, literally the word Antichrist in the scriptures. And we see that there's no individual that he's talking about. However, let us conclude. Therefore, the Antichrist is not an individual, but a spirit of persecution against Christians and Christianity in the first century. However, now I get to the however. The Abomination of Desolation is also considered by futurists to be another phrase of the same individual, the Antichrist. So we're going to have to take a look at Abomination of Desolation and see if that refers to an individual that might be occurring in our future.
This short video illustrated a common misinterpretation many Christians have regarding the Antichrist. And that leads us to the next question: who or what is the Abomination of Desolation? In my online course, I'll examine that monster in great detail. The answer might surprise you as well. I hope you've seen from these free videos that there's more than a few surprises for you in my in-depth biblical course. I'll be addressing things like the rapture, the great tribulation, the beast, and so much more. And I think you'll find that the more biblical you become, the less modern will be your interpretation of the end times. So join me now and enroll in my online course, Are We Living in the Last Days? And start your journey of discovery about the truth of end times Bible prophecy.